Still with the brush, just adding some of the details in the background now. And just some wiring and stuff that's sort of coming down, which has been this metal object which has been ripped apart by Colossus, sort of just drawing the wires and the electrical wires are inside this piece of machinery that he's broken apart. Again, still with the brush, just using the varying line weights to show these sort of bent, twisted, and ripped pieces of metal in the foreground. Again, just sort of going darker with some of the shadows, sort of indicate that they're in the extreme foreground. Not a lot of detail needed. You can see me just putting in some thick brush strokes, some dry brush shadows, just to indicate that they're in the extreme foreground. It also helps to sort of block in and sort of frame Colossus by having those dark areas on the edges there. You can sort of see them as they're sort of pointing inwards towards Colossus as well. So drawing the attention to the main focus of the panel. Now I've decided to just put some of these coils of the wires in with the repeater graph, just again with the 0.35, just to sort of keep them uniform looking. I'm just going to add the reflections and sort of the shadowing on the pipes in with that as well. And just sort of for the wires that are in shadow, I'm just laying those in with the 0.7 repeater graph. Again, jumping around, just see me. I'm just looking at the picture and seeing where I need to add a bit more detail, and I'm just sort of adding some mechanical shapes and wires and pneumatic sort of looking devices here, and I'm sort of picturing this thing as a sort of like an armature that was sort of coming down, and these are all the hydraulic sort of things that were controlling the claw there that's on the ground. So I'm just drawing the insides of, just adding a little bit of detail down there. I'm just sort of freestyling this, just adding in bits that I feel there's a bit of a panel there on the side of the armor plating, and just anything that sort of looks electronic and mechanical. And I'm just laying this in with the doing the claw with the crow quill now. Again, I want to have some varying line weights, still sort of keeping them rigid lines, and just adding a bit of a darker side away from the light source, and so the detail on the other side of the claw. Some detail into the joints of the fingers of the claw. It's very quick to sort of lay this in with the crow quill. I can just have these sort of thick lines indicating the texture on the pads of the claw, the actual gripping part. Instead of having to switch between different size repeater graphs, I can just do that very quickly with the with the crow quill. I'm just putting some rivets and things on. I want to have a bit more metal in the foreground there, so it's going to be covering this claw here. So you can see me putting large objects sort of to save on a bit of drawing time as well. I'm just adding a bit of another pipe and some more textures and things and sort of dirtying it up just to sort of cover that claw. It sort of saves a bit of drawing time, and it also just adds a bit more depth by adding another plane there. Then was sort of crossing the plane over of the other metal sheets sort of over the top of the claw, so sort of to help it indicate that it's moving further in the background. Again, just adding more details to the underside of this claw here. I'm just doing this stuff off the top of my head. Whatever looks cool. Okay, now I'm just going to let that side dry. I'm going to move back over to this side and just going to do some of the detail here in the broken arm to show a bit more of the wiring and electronics and hydraulics and things inside the armature. Again, I'm just sort of scribbling in these details, just anything that sort of remotely looks electrical or computerized. I'm just sort of putting a whole mess of stuff in there. Again, just adding another element in the background there. Again, it's sort of angled and pointing in towards Colossus, drawing attention in from this side towards Colossus. Just looking at the piece and just trying to balance out where I need to add more detail. I'm just going to move in here and add some of the sparks and things flying off, and I'm just going to use the brush to lay these in, because I can go really thin and also sort of have some just add a little bit more pressure to sort of at the end there of my stroke to just give the impression of sort of sparks flying and also sort of bouncing off the metal object there in the background. Adding a bit of rendering there. A bit more texture down the bottom. Now I'm going to move on to panel 4, and I'm just adding a bit of sort of reflection, sort of rendering to the, I'm imagining sort of like a shiny floor here, so I'm just using some dry brush to just do some strokes here. Again, not loading the brush up too much, and it's already sort of starting to dry out on the brush, so it's leaving that sort of rough edge that I want. Just around doing the underside of the syringe, and the top of the panel there is sort of they also help to sort of point down towards the arm. I'm just putting a bit of a shadow as well underneath here, under the arm, sort of a shadow sort of reflection thing. Just being careful not to go over Colossus's fist there. Now it's not an entirely correct shadow, but just sort of indicating a shadow there. Now I'm actually going to move in and put in some white details now. I'm actually just using some white gouache here, and just a watercolor brush to lay in the highlights and effects that I'm going to be doing. Just a little sparkle here, and just diluting it with a bit of water on a piece of paper there on the left, and then just using the point of my brush to create this sort of sparkle effect on his head. Just to sort of help separate that side of his head from the shadows. I'm actually using a whole bean artist gouache here, which is the permanent white, which I find quite good for laying in my white highlights in my inks. I'm just cutting back into the dry brush here that I did, just with some white squiggles to sort of indicate a bit more of a shiny floor, I guess, just a different texture again. I like using a lot of different textures on the page and throughout the panels. Okay, now this is actually how I go on to add the white areas, so I'll still get those nice organic lines with the reflections and the shadows that I've laid in with the blacks, and then I just help define those banding lines around Colossus by going back over the black that I've laid in on the shadows, just with the white gouache, and just picking one side there, the top side obviously, which is going to catch the light, and just adds a bit more depth and a bit more of a three-dimensionality to the bands and the armor plating that's happening on his skin there. So that a lot of artists don't always go back and add those sort of details, but it can be a little bit time consuming, but I'm going quite quick here with this, so and it's a lot of fun to do as well, so I like adding those little details in. And just a few more details adding to the sparks here. Just rolling my brush on the paper to sort of get a point and get a bit more gouache on there. Just seeing if there's anywhere else that I need to add some white details. That's pretty much it. And this is the finished page. Thanks for watching, and I hope it was helpful listening to some of the commentary and seeing my work process.